For thousands of years, humanity believed death was life's greatest enemy. Ancient Sumerian tablets connected with Enki preserve a strikingly different warning. Buried within cuneiform inscriptions is an unsettling message, suggesting another danger destroys people long before their final breath arrives. That forgotten idea survived fallen kingdoms, shifting rivers, and thousands of years beneath the earth, until archaeologists recovered the evidence. Today we'll examine the earliest Mesopotamian sources, separate historical records from modern speculation, and uncover what Enki's traditions repeatedly urged humanity to fear instead of death. Before we begin, tell us which country you're watching from below. The search for Enki's warning begins with one of humanity's oldest surviving works of wisdom literature. It is not a tale about monsters, magical weapons, or immortal kings. Instead, it is a collection of practical advice written for everyday life. Modern scholars call it the Instructions of Shurupak, and many consider it one of the oldest surviving pieces of written wisdom in human history. The text presents an aging ruler, Shurupak, speaking to his son Zausustro. Rather than explaining how to defeat death or escape the underworld, he spends page after page warning about ordinary human behavior. He tells his son not to steal, not to lie, not to spread false accusations, not to abuse power. He encourages honesty, patience, respect, fairness, and self-control. At first, those instructions sound almost too simple. Yet they raise an important question. If ancient Mesopotamians feared death above everything else, why does one of their oldest surviving texts spend so much time discussing character instead of mortality? That question becomes even more interesting when historians compare this wisdom text with traditions connected to Enki. Across different sources, separated by centuries, the same pattern quietly appears. Enki is repeatedly associated with careful judgment, practical intelligence, and preserving order whenever disorder threatens to spread. His role is surprisingly consistent. He solves problems before they become disasters. He prevents chaos instead of celebrating destruction. His stories rarely glorify violence. Instead, they reward thoughtful decisions. That perspective reveals something important. Perhaps the greatest danger was never the end of life itself. Perhaps the greater danger was the behavior that slowly destroyed life long before death arrived. One careless choice can damage a family. Thousands of careless choices can erase an entire civilization. The people of ancient Sumer witnessed cities rising through cooperation and falling through human failure. They understood that disasters rarely appeared without warning. Long before walls collapsed or harvests failed, smaller problems had already begun spreading through society. A dishonest merchant weakened trade. An unfair judge weakened justice. A selfish official weakened public trust. Each mistake looked small on its own. Together, they became impossible to ignore. This explains why early Sumerian wisdom focuses so heavily on everyday conduct. Character was never viewed as a private matter. Every decision affected neighbors, families, markets, and rulers alike. Trust became one of civilization's most valuable resources. Unlike grain, it could not be stored. Unlike buildings, it could not be rebuilt quickly. Once people stopped believing one another, every part of society became weaker. Death could end one person's story. Broken trust could change history for generations. That difference helps explain why ancient writers devoted so much attention to responsibility rather than mortality. The deeper researchers study these early tablets, the more one remarkable pattern emerges. Different texts, different scribes, different centuries. The same warning appears repeatedly. Human beings usually destroy themselves from within before enemies destroy them from outside. That idea leads directly toward Enki's role in Mesopotamian tradition. He is remembered not simply because he possessed knowledge, but because he understood how fragile civilization truly was. Rivers could flood, crops could fail, kingdoms could collapse. Those dangers were real. Even greater dangers lived inside human choices: greed, pride, dishonesty, corruption. Ancient writers believed those invisible forces spread farther than disease because they passed from one generation to the next unless someone chose a different path. This is where our investigation takes a surprising turn. Another Sumerian text, connected with Enki, shifts from simple advice to a much larger question. It asks, what keeps an entire civilization alive? The answer has almost nothing to do with escaping death. It has everything to do with preventing a slower kind of destruction that begins while people are still alive. The question left behind by the instructions of Shurupak leads naturally to another remarkable Sumerian source, known today as the Aridu Genesis. If the earlier text explains how individuals should live, this one widens the picture and asks a much larger question. What allows an entire civilization to survive? If you're enjoying this investigation into original Sumerian tablets and evidence-based ancient mysteries, subscribe now. Every week, we explore authentic Mesopotamian texts, separate history from modern speculation, and uncover forgotten stories that still shape our world today. Most people recognize the Aridu Genesis because it contains one of history's oldest flood traditions. That is only part of the story. Before the flood appears, the text carefully describes an organized human world. Cities already exist. Fields are cultivated. Temples stand at the center of communities. Leaders govern their people. Farmers grow food. Workers maintain canals. Daily life depends upon cooperation between thousands of ordinary people. The author spends valuable space describing civilization before describing its destruction. That choice is significant. Ancient writers rarely wasted words. They wanted readers to understand exactly what was at stake. A flood cannot destroy civilization unless civilization already exists. The story first shows what humanity has built before revealing how easily those achievements can disappear. Stone walls look strong. Invisible foundations are much stronger. Every successful city depended upon systems that most people never noticed. Irrigation canals had to remain clear. Harvests needed fair distribution. Agreements required honesty. Laws depended upon public confidence. Leaders had to think beyond their own interests. None of those foundations could be touched. Yet every one of them mattered. The Sumerians understood that civilizations stand upon invisible principles before they stand upon bricks. Once those principles weaken, physical collapse eventually follows. History repeatedly confirms that pattern. Powerful kingdoms often appear stable until trust begins disappearing. Corruption slowly replaces fairness. Personal ambition replaces responsibility. Short-term gain replaces long-term planning. The change is gradual. Many people fail to notice it. Eventually, the damage becomes impossible to hide. This helps explain Enki's place within Mesopotamian tradition. He repeatedly appears wherever balance needs restoring. His actions consistently favor preservation over destruction, careful judgment over emotional reaction, and practical solutions over reckless force. These qualities made him one of the most respected figures in Sumerian thought. Not because he prevented every disaster, because he understood how disasters usually begin. Ancient floods were terrifying. The slow collapse of character frightened Sumerian writers even more. Read several Mesopotamian texts together and another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Physical disasters are dangerous because they threaten the body. Moral failures threaten everything. A dishonest ruler influences thousands of people. An unjust law changes countless lives. A corrupt official teaches corruption to those beneath him. Bad examples spread surprisingly fast. Good examples require patience. This idea appears repeatedly throughout Sumerian wisdom literature. Communities become stronger when honesty, fairness, and responsibility are protected. Communities become weaker when selfishness slowly becomes acceptable. Death eventually reaches every human being. Civilizations, however, often survive for centuries. The ancient authors wanted those centuries to be peaceful rather than chaotic. That ambition shaped the advice they recorded. Their concern extended beyond one lifetime. They were writing for generations they would never meet. The next source connected with Enki takes this idea even further. Instead of describing how civilization survives, it explains why every person, every city, and every responsibility was believed to have a purpose. Understanding that purpose changes the entire investigation. It also brings us much closer to discovering what Enki's traditions repeatedly suggest humanity should truly fear before death ever arrives. The next stage of this investigation begins with one of the most important texts connected to Enki, a composition modern scholars call Enki and the World Order. Unlike the wisdom instructions or the flood traditions, this tablet focuses on something entirely different. It describes how the world functions when every part fulfills its proper role. Enki is not shown preparing for war. He is not searching for immortality. He is not warning humanity about the underworld. Instead, he travels through the world assigning responsibilities. Rivers receive their purpose. Fields receive their purpose. Mountains receive their purpose. Cities receive their purpose. Craftsmen receive their purpose. Rulers receive their purpose. Every part of creation contributes to the stability of the whole. At first glance, the poem seems like a simple religious story. A closer reading reveals something much deeper. Order does not happen by accident. It survives because every part continues doing the work it was meant to do. That idea reaches far beyond mythology. It reflects how the Sumerians understood civilization itself. Nothing collapsed overnight. Everything failed, one neglected responsibility at a time. Imagine an irrigation canal left uncleared for several seasons. Water slows, fields produce smaller harvests. Food becomes scarce, trade weakens, families suffer. One neglected task begins affecting thousands of lives. The same pattern applies to leadership. When judges abandon fairness, people lose confidence in justice. When rulers seek personal wealth instead of public stability, trust disappears. When workers neglect their skills, cities gradually weaken. The ancient poem presents responsibility almost like the gears inside a great machine. Each part appears small. Together, they keep civilization alive. This explains why Enki's stories repeatedly emphasize balance instead of domination. Power alone cannot sustain a kingdom. Order requires cooperation. Responsibility requires discipline. Leadership requires wisdom. Without those qualities, even the strongest city begins weakening long before enemies appear outside its walls. The danger develops quietly. Many people notice only the final collapse. Ancient writers were interested in the earlier stages. They wanted readers to recognize the warning signs before recovery became impossible. The poem contains another detail that modern readers often overlook. Enki never assigns responsibility to only kings. Everyone has a place. Farmers grow food. Builders raise homes. Craftsmen create tools. Merchants move goods. Priests perform rituals. Leaders protect justice. Each role matters because every role supports another. The system succeeds through cooperation rather than competition. That perspective makes the title of this video even more interesting. If every person carries responsibility, then every person also carries the ability to weaken society through careless choices. The greatest threat no longer looks like death. It looks like neglected duty. It looks like dishonesty becoming ordinary. It looks like selfish ambition replacing service. Those dangers spread silently. Unlike storms or earthquakes, they cannot be seen approaching. People often recognize them only after trust has already disappeared. This may explain why texts connected with Enki spend so much time describing order before discussing disaster. The writers wanted readers to understand what must be protected. Only then could they understand what was truly at risk. The next tablet introduces a surprising conversation that pushes this idea even further. It explores what happens when knowledge, authority, and responsibility fall into the wrong hands. That story has become one of the most misunderstood episodes in all of Mesopotamian literature, yet it offers another important clue to the warning hidden inside Enki's traditions. The next clue appears in another famous Sumerian composition known as Enki and Inanna. Unlike the previous texts, this story is not centered on floods, kings, or the creation of cities. Instead, it follows an unusual meeting between two powerful deities that has fascinated historians for generations. Most modern retellings focus only on the dramatic ending. The deeper lesson begins much earlier. According to the story, Inanna visits Enki and Aridu. The two share a ceremonial feast, and during their conversation, Enki gives Inanna a collection of sacred powers known as the Mi. These are not magical weapons or hidden treasures. In Sumerian thought, the Mi represent the divine principles that make civilization function. They include authority, craftsmanship, justice, kingship, music, writing, law, skilled labor, religious practice, many other qualities connected with organized human society. The story quickly becomes complicated. After Inanna leaves with the Mi, Enki realizes what has happened and sends his servants to recover them. Yet despite several attempts, Inanna successfully reaches the city of Uruk with the sacred powers. For centuries, readers have asked the same question. Why would Enki first give them away and then try to bring them back? The answer may not be as simple as it first appears. The real mystery is not who possessed the Mi. The real mystery is why they mattered so much. The Mi symbolize something every civilization depends upon: knowledge, authority, responsibility, order. Without them, cities cannot grow beyond scattered villages. Without them, justice becomes uncertain. Without them, skilled workers lose direction. The story reminds readers that civilization is built upon invisible foundations rather than visible monuments. Stone walls can protect a city. They cannot create wisdom. Beautiful temples can inspire people. They cannot guarantee honest leadership. Powerful rulers can command armies. They cannot force citizens to trust one another. Those qualities must be earned. The transfer of the mana reflects the movement of civilization itself. Knowledge can spread. Leadership can change. Responsibility can pass from one generation to another. The greatest question is never whether power exists. The greatest question is who chooses to use it wisely. Ancient audiences would have recognized that lesson immediately. Possessing authority means very little without the character to exercise it well. This brings us remarkably close to the answer hidden inside today's title. Across every source examined so far, the same pattern continues appearing. The instructions of Shurupak warn against destructive behavior. The Aridu Genesis shows how fragile civilization can become. Enki and the World Order explains that every person carries responsibility. Now Enki and Inanna demonstrates that knowledge and authority can either strengthen society or quietly undermine it. Viewed together, these texts reveal a consistent philosophy. Human beings rarely lose everything because death suddenly arrives. Far more often, they lose everything because truth is abandoned, responsibility is neglected, and power is separated from wisdom. That process begins long before anyone notices. It grows through ordinary choices repeated every day. One dishonest decision, one unfair judgment, one broken promise. Soon those actions become accepted as normal. Once that happens, the strongest civilization begins weakening from within. The final chapter of this investigation brings every source together. Instead of searching for one dramatic sentence supposedly spoken by Enki, we will examine the complete historical pattern preserved across independent Sumerian traditions. That evidence reveals why historians believe the oldest warning was never really about death. It was about something far more dangerous, because people often fail to recognize it until it has already changed the future. The final piece of this investigation does not come from discovering one forgotten tablet or uncovering one dramatic sentence spoken by Enki. Instead, it comes from placing several independent Sumerian sources beside one another and asking a simple historical question. Do they point toward the same idea? The answer is surprisingly consistent. The instructions of Shurupak warn against dishonesty, greed, violence, and broken trust. The Aridu Genesis presents civilization as something fragile that depends upon cooperation before catastrophe ever appears. Enki and the World Order explains that every person and every institution carries responsibilities that maintain stability. Enki and Inanna demonstrates that knowledge, authority, and social order can strengthen a society or weaken it, depending on how people choose to use them. Each text was written for a different purpose. Each belongs to a different literary tradition, yet together they reveal one remarkable pattern. The greatest dangers are rarely the ones people fear first. Death ends a single life. The slow collapse of truth, justice, and responsibility can change the future of countless generations. That conclusion does not depend upon modern imagination. It grows naturally from the evidence preserved inside the surviving tablets themselves. One important distinction still remains. It deserves careful attention. No surviving cuneiform tablet records Enki saying the exact sentence, "Humans should fear this instead of death." Responsible historians do not claim such a quotation exists. That is not how ancient history works. Instead, researchers compare multiple texts, identify repeated themes, study their historical setting, and draw conclusions supported by consistent evidence rather than isolated passages. This approach protects both the history and the reader. It allows us to appreciate the ancient world without adding words that ancient scribes never wrote. Ironically, that careful method reflects the very values associated with Enki. Patience before certainty, evidence before conclusions, understanding before judgment. Perhaps that is one of the most valuable lessons these ancient traditions still offer today. Truth deserves careful examination, not comfortable assumptions. 4,000 years have passed since these tablets were first pressed into wet clay. The world has changed beyond anything their writers could have imagined. Empires have risen, empires have disappeared. Languages have been forgotten. New technologies have transformed daily life. Even so, the central warning found across these Sumerian traditions feels strangely familiar. A society cannot survive on wealth alone. It cannot survive on military strength alone. It cannot survive on technology alone. Without honesty, responsibility, justice, and respect for truth, every achievement eventually becomes fragile. History has demonstrated that lesson repeatedly across civilizations separated by thousands of years. Perhaps that explains why Enki continues to fascinate historians, archaeologists, and readers alike. His legacy is not built upon promises of escaping death. It rests upon something far more practical. He represents thoughtful leadership in moments of confusion, careful judgment during uncertainty, responsible action before crisis. Maybe the oldest warning connected with Enki was never asking humanity to fear death at all. Maybe it was asking something much harder. Protect the principles that keep civilization alive before they quietly disappear. Ignore them, and no city, no kingdom, and no generation remains secure for very long. That possibility is why these ancient Sumerian tablets continue speaking to the modern world after more than 4 millennia. Ancient Sumer's oldest warnings still challenge the modern world in unexpected ways. Another forgotten tablet connected with Enki reveals an even greater mystery that historians continue debating today. Click the next video now and continue uncovering the hidden history preserved beneath thousands of years of ancient Mesopotamian civilization.